Hello! Welcome to episode 3 of the Jericho Comedy podcast. We're Jericho Comedy, an award-winning comedy club based in Oxford. We're really missing our lovely audiences at the minute, so this podcast is an effort to keep you connected to our amazing acts. I'm Connor McReynolds. In today's episode, we're chatting to the brilliant Jacob Hawley, and as an extra treat, we're joined by Mr. Saturday Night himself, Alex Farrow. Alex and Jacob go way back, and in this episode you get to hear a brilliant conversation between these guys all about Jacob's comedy. I love this chat. I think you're going to love it too. You're also going to be hearing a clip recorded live at Jericho Comedy, and we'll be playing a message from our wonderful charity partner, Oxfordshire Mind. But right now, let's dive straight in. Here's the fantastic Jacob Hawley.
I've done that. I've done a similar thing on my podcast before, where we use software where it's kind of similar, and we thought a guest wasn't there, and the guest was actually a close mate of mine who he's actually like my oldest friend. I've known him since we were like 6. And and the guy who I was talking to the producer of my podcast, and he was there, but we didn't know he was, and he could hear me saying to my producer, going, "I just need to get on TV soon." And as soon as we got off, like, I'm in a group chat with him and like 10 people that I grew up with. I spent about a week getting rinsed for that. Like, I just need to get on TV soon. Because, like, in the context, because me and the producer of that, so he produced my drugs podcast, and we're like in the process of turning that into a kind of TV thing. So
Awesome.
In respect of the, like, that conversation, like in the context, it's not I mean, it's still quite pathetic, but it's not quite. You can use that, by the way, if you want to use me telling you how desperate I am to get on television, please feel free to chuck that in your podcast. I'm keen for anyone to hear it who can help with my problem.
Well, we've got Jacob Hawley with us here. It's fantastic to speak to you, Jacob. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm great. I'm very well. I've very nearly got a child. I genuinely might have to stop this conversation because my girlfriend might go into labour.
Oh, wow.
Aside from that, I've done most of my work for the day. The sun's shining. Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm really good. How are you guys?
It's such an odd way to describe becoming a father, to say that you've nearly got a child. Really, without context, it's got real, like, where from sort of vibes.
Sounds like
It was very important that you followed up by saying that your girlfriend had nearly gone into labor, because otherwise it was just like, I'm bidding for it on eBay.
I'm outside with a net. Schools will be it is 2:15, so in an hour schools will be finished, so the streets will be full of them.
I used to have the same thing. Obviously, I for a long time would say things like, I used to be a school teacher, and then I'd do a set or whatever. And the number of people who would come up to me after a gig and be like, "Yeah, so, like, what did you do, mate?" And I'd be like, "What? Got chucked out of teaching?" No, I left of my own accord. It's just you got to specify these things.
So, Jacob, obviously, I mean, lockdown super stressful anyway. With a pregnant partner as well. That's an interesting situation. How's it been?
To be honest with you, yeah, like, I could easily sort of play the role of like, oh yeah, it's been a nightmare. She's been this, but in honest truth, it's been beautiful. Like I've had a lovely time. Like, I was out 7 nights a week, usually pre-lockdown. I was, during the daytimes, I was either recording podcast or writing or doing those kind of things. And my partner was full-time NHS midwife, doing extra shifts everywhere. So we were just so busy. So it's the sort of more boring thing to say, to not play the role of the, that you're supposed to moan about it constantly when you're either having a child or got a child or whatever. But it's genuinely been, like, beautiful. Like, we've got to spend time together. Financially, I was sort of saved by I was one of those people that properly fell through the cracks of, like, I didn't get any support at all from the government, but I've been making this podcast for BBC Sound, so that sort of looked after us money wise, and I've had a couple of writing gigs as well. So Yeah, mate, it's genuinely been lovely, and um, I moved to a new block of flats just before lockdown, literally like the week before,
Oh
and
wow.
there's like a sort of communal garden and like communal roof area where you can sit, and that sort of quickly became a pub garden where like all the people who live here, you know, and, like people who lived here for like years have been like, we've never met our neighbors before, and now like it's a proper little community. There's like a group chat, like we were getting pissed together. We had a few little sessions together. Like it's been really good, man.
Oh, that sounds idyllic.
Yeah, it's been beautiful. Like I'm very careful who I say it all to because it is kind of gloaty. But then the fact that I like because I think it's sort of just about alleviated by the fact that I didn't get any money from the government. Do you know what I mean? So
Yes,
I've been
yeah.
fucked enough with that I'm allowed to brag about the fact that I've got
Allowed to find the positives
yeah,
elsewhere,
that
definitely.
I've got a lovely pregnant girlfriend and a communal garden. I think in
That
terms of like the scales of privilege, they just about balance each other out.
I think so. I think that's fair. Well, Jacob, you mentioned the Job Center podcast that you've been working on,
Mm.
and before that, obviously, the drugs podcast. And I was such a massive fan, particularly the drugs podcast.
Oh,
Uh,
thanks, brother.
it's just I loved it. I mean, it was one of the best things I've heard in such a long time. I know nothing about drugs. I went to a very Catholic school, like taught by nuns and that kind of thing,
Wow.
so the message was properly never do drugs, and we're not going to give you any sort of form of balanced argument. So I came to it from a very fearful point of view, and I thought that the podcast did such a great job of considering every possible angle and every aspect of it
Oh,
and every
thank
point
you
of
very
view.
much. That was yeah. I mean, to hear people who as you know aren't well acquainted with the topic or certainly have previously been opposed to the topic or what the topic entails. That's kind of like the biggest compliment, you know, when
Oh,
people say that
great!
they're into
Yeah.
it like that.
So how did it come about? I mean, did you approach the BBC, or did they see you, smoking crack on a street corner or something?
He likes drugs. Let him do it. No, so what it was, in 2017, I was at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival with Alex,
Yeah.
and I was in a competition called the BBC New Comedy Award. So
Yeah, yeah.
that I guess that kind of got me on the radar of people who at the time were working at the BBC, and then BBC Sounds came up, which meant there was like a budget for new stuff. And I actually, I had a couple of producers who had been involved with that competition or had been aware of that competition who sort of messaged me being like, hey, got any ideas for podcasts? Blah, blah, blah. And there was a couple of ideas that I ran past people which were just sort of like off the cuff, like, oh, yeah, like the usual shit, like oh, I'm into boxing, what if we get other comedians who are also into boxing to talk about
Yeah,
boxing?
yeah.
Well, I'm into football, what if we make the 1000th podcast where comedians talk about football? Do you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and correctly they sort of fell by the wayside, but um I'd wanted to make a I'd wanted to make something that combines comedy and sort of documentary on the topic of drugs, like for a very long time, largely just because I didn't feel like uh, there was anything, I'm talking about the medium of television because I watch television, but I didn't really listen to radio on the topic or
Mhm.
really podcasts. But I didn't really feel like there was anything that had like handled it the way it should be handled with any level of nuance, right? So whenever you watch a Stacey Dooley documentary, uh, drug dealers are villains and murderers. Drug addicts are losers and bums, and everyone else is fine. Do you know what I mean? It's very
Yeah,
broad
yeah, yeah.
brushstrokes. And as someone who's sort of had an experience of drug culture for 10 years now, it's just not my it doesn't relate to my experience, like some of the best people I know do drugs. Like some of the nicest people I know have had drug addiction problems. I have members of my family who are drug dealers who are incredibly kind. Do you know what I mean? And so
Yeah,
I
yeah,
wanted
yeah.
I wanted to make something that was balance and nuance in that sense. But being a sort of wide-eyed comedian who is at the time 25 or whatever, and I'd only been going for a couple of years. I'd always thought this would be a TV show, right?
Yeah.
and then it gets, you know, you're 4 years in and you're 27 and you go, oh, no one wants to give me a TV show. So, but someone might give me a podcast. So that's sort of how and why we developed On Drugs as a podcast series. And now we're sort of slowly in the process of turning it into uh I want to say like a visual thing, because I'm not sure it will necessarily be television, in the sense it might just go out online or like on a sort of streaming platform or whatever. But yeah, so
But
that's how it came about. It was Nick Coop, who's become a really good friend of mine now, who he helped produce the New Comedy Awards, and he was just, you know, we sat down, had a few pints and spoke about this idea, made a pilot, you know, knocked it back and forth. And I think over the course of, you know, the 18 months that we spent making the sort of 17 episodes of that, we got better at making it. I mean, I was hugely influenced by Jamali Maddox and the show that he made for Vice about race, which is called Hate Thy Neighbor. And
okay.
I did sort of speak to Jamali. We
It's an
worked
amazing
together
series.
on the Liam Williams. What, Jamali's one?
Yeah, well, yes, and yours as well. Yeah, but I can see
Yeah,
that.
but
I can
mate,
see the. I can see the links between the two.
I think Jamali's one is completely groundbreaking. I think the only person who I've seen do anything like what Jamali does with that series is, do you know Mark Thomas?
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
It's kind of like Gonzo comedy.
Yeah, Gonzo comedy. That's a great way of putting it. You know, I've been on an adventure. I've gone off and discovered things, and I've come back to tell you about them
Yeah.
to an audience. You know, and I love that. And yes, so Jamali and I were actually working on Liam Williams' sitcom together. We had a day's filming, and this was sort of halfway through the process of making On Drugs. And like, I had a really good chat with him about it, because he went on to make another documentary series with Channel 4. And he was sort of talking about it, and so, and I sort of had to say, I was like, oh man, I hope I'm not stealing your thing. And he was very sort of humble about it, and like, oh no, you know, it's you know, we spoke about Mark Thomas as well. But yeah, Gonzo comedy is a great way of putting it. And it's, I guess that's slightly an element of what we wanted to do. And this is a big thing that they talk about with like these, you know, when you have these TV meetings and stuff, is like, you know, how can we show you've been on a journey? How can we make it seem like, and like, you can go through like the emotional and psychological bollocks of going, oh, I've really grown as a person whilst making this podcast. But like, the best thing that we found is to just go on a fucking journey. So there was like, there was an episode that we did in prison, and we did, you know, travel up to Doncaster and just
Yeah.
go to a prison. And that's one of the best ones. And that's, you know, and I remember the commissioners being like, oh yes, it really sounds like you went on a journey. So, yeah, I sat on a train for 3 hours. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's why.
Well, I mean, you speak on the podcast and you've spoken in some of your shows and stuff about how you are a recreational drug user. Uh, Having spoken to the vast array of people, I mean, you've spoken to people in rehab, you know, recovering addicts, you've spoken to people who are still addicted. I mean, you've seen pretty much every angle of drug culture in the UK. And does it make you think about the way that you have used drugs or the way you will use drugs moving forward?
I think, yeah, it's impossible not to, you know, when you've spoken to anyone about a topic like that, it's impossible for it not to impact the way you feel about it. And certainly, for it to, I mean, does it affect how I use drugs? Honestly, not always. Like, I I think the thing to remember is when you use recreational drugs, it's never a particularly considered decision.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? When you're at a pub and someone says, "Oh, do you want to pick up?" You should sit there and go, oh, well, I recorded a podcast with Jack Barry the other day, and Jack Barry was telling me how his girlfriend's from South America, and in South America, you know, the cocaine trade has destroyed so many lives and communities, and he doesn't actually do cocaine anymore. He smokes weed because he thinks that doesn't necessarily impact lives in the same way. So maybe we should pick up weed instead of coke, and you know, that would actually be taken forward. What I've learned from that. Also, I spoke to this other guy who's actually got, you know, addiction problems with cocaine that destroyed his life, ruined his family. None of that goes through your head. You just go, I like cocaine. Yes, I'll have some. Do you know what I mean? So, don't get me wrong. If I'm to sit here and give like a considered opinion on those things now, yes, I think the things I learned whilst doing the podcast are very much part of my opinions on it. I think you know, I learned interesting things about the legalization debate and why that is a debate rather than a lot of people will blanket tell you that we should legalize drugs, but there are really interesting reasons against the way legalization has been done in other countries, not necessarily against the idea of legalization in general, but the way it's been done in other countries, does more damage to black and minority ethnicity communities. Takes the economy of drugs away from communities that could potentially benefit and back into the hands of rich white people who have pharmaceutical companies. Blah 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 blah. There's a lot of interesting stuff that I've learned over the series of making that, and just from growing up. Does it always mean that I make an informed and clever decision when people ask me if I'd like to do some recreational drugs with them? No, it absolutely doesn't. But yeah, the other thing is that as I say, it was 2017 when someone first said to me, "Do you want to?" Oh no, it's probably 2018 when someone said, "Do you want to make a podcast about drugs?" It went out in 2019. Then the next ones went out in 2020. We're getting towards the third quarter of 2020 now. I'm going to have a kid soon. In reality, life getting tiring is the reason that I'm doing less drugs than before, not because I've had informed conversations with interesting people.
I think that's as valid a reason as any that you stated, though. I think kids are going to change everything. Yeah. I mean, sort of moving away from the topic, but not necessarily the podcast. Like, you're such a natural at it, and I mean that was reaffirmed by the silver award at the Arias, the kind of radio BAFTAs.
Yeah.
Was radio something that you thought you were, or ever thought you were kind of gonna do and gonna be really good at, or is it something that it's kind of happened and now you're thinking, oh, I should do more of it?
I think, I mean, that whole thing with like the arias and all that stuff. Like I didn't know what the arias were.
Yeah.
I remember I was in a pub and I got a text from Nick, the producer, being like, "You're nominated for an aria," and I had no idea what it was. But this is because I'm not I'm not someone who, when I think of radio, it's listening to Radio 1 in the back of my mum's car. I wasn't aware that there were, growing up, I wasn't a Radio 4 person. Do you know what I mean? And actually, what was so nice about going to those awards, I think the girls who won that Best New Presenter Awards, they were like, again, it was a podcast. They were girls who, didn't look or sound like your typical Radio 4 presenter.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I think that was the nice thing about that, which is that I think with the way that radio is now, and I've done a few bits for Radio 4. I did a stand-up special on Radio 4. I was supposed to be recording a new one for Radio 4 in a few weeks' time, actually, but that's gone now, obviously. But I think, the thing with podcast, and I hate that I've become a podcast guy. I find it really cringe.
This is episode 3 of the Jericho podcast, Jacob. So yeah.
It's there's a real kind of stereotype of like a straight white man who thinks his voice is interesting enough he deserves a podcast, and it's a shame that all three of us fall into that bracket. But yeah, that's one thing that is nice about it, is because it's like quite an open format and anyone can do it. I think it's kind of opened up the doors of radio and stuff like that, and it allows more voices on there. And I think, I don't remember who won the bronze award for Best New Presenter, but I think definitely in terms of me and the girls who won it, it's like, oh, okay, they're not voices you necessarily would usually hear on the radio in terms of background, in terms of what they're like, in terms of the sort of stuff we talk about. We wouldn't have been on Radio 4 10 years ago. So I think it's a nice thing that not only are the doors slightly more open now, but that voices like ours are getting recognised.
Now, at Jericho Comedy, we have really been missing performing every weekend at our lovely regular venues in front of our fantastic audiences. So right now, we want to transport you back to a Saturday night at Jericho Cafe with a bit of fun with Mr. Saturday Night himself, Mr. Alex Farrow. Here he is. Enjoy.
Paula, is this your husband?
It's my son.
Son! Oh my word. I just scandalised the downstairs of the Jericho Cafe there. Oh my word. Lovely to meet you. May I ask No, I'm not going to ask how old you are. No, fuck it, I'm going to do it. How old are you, sir?
I'm 18.
18?
Yeah.
Obviously. He says, I'm 18. I'm a man. So that's nice to meet you. What's your name?
I'm Will.
Nice to meet you, Will. Nice to meet you. Do you want to follow your friends and family into banking?
No, I'm moving to chemistry. At
Chemistry?
Leeds, yeah.
Chemistry at Leeds. What do you think about chemistry at Leeds? Ah, the most popular of everything that's happened so far. Excellent, man. What's your favourite chemical?
Oxygen.
Oxygen. Smart. Yeah, that's how you get into a red brick university, isn't it? Good interview technique, Will. I like that. Chemistry. What do I know about chemistry? I've got a good one. I learned recently about castoreum, the chemical castoreum. Do you know what that is? He's like, nah, mate. Nah, more this Latin stuff. So you probably won't know about that name. Castoreum is vanilla flavouring. So if you've ever had like a cheap ice cream, you've probably had castoreum in it. Got a bit of a. It was a man imitating having an ice cream there. You know. Explaining the concept of an ice cream. What a sad life must be living. You know, when you gotta lick it, and you know, it's tasty. Off with vanilla. My word. That's weirder than the weird fact I'm about to tell you. Castoreum, they get from. There's no need to go. Look, were you imitating an ice cream? What were you imitating? That's not what I was doing.
It's the anal glands of a beaver, isn't it?
Round of applause for this gentleman. Just give him a round of applause. You haven't heard what he said yet. Castoreum we get from the anal glands of the Eurasian beaver. And that's why he's going, no. Just in case you're wondering what that image is, that's the squeezing of the glands. Why your tongue is there, I'm not entirely sure. but great factual knowledge. Will, you take this to Leeds. Because, ladies and gentlemen, we need a chemist to work out why we can't just use actual vanilla. What's wrong with vanilla pods? I presume it's like an expense thing or something like that. And Will, we need you to work on us all not having beaver anus in our mouths. That's what we need the youth to do.
That's what I'll do.
Paul is keen as well, right? Good, excellent. There's like a couple of issues with the with vanilla coming from beaver anus. One, who the fuck found out that shit? Right? I'm guessing it might be you. Very anatomical knowledge there. With the squeezing of it. Look, he even knows there's two. He even knows there's two glands.
You gotta milk them.
You milk them, you do. You milk them, issue number two with that is, you know, like, if you are going to be having anal sex with a beaver, and I'm not here to judge anybody's sexual preferences, don't worry, you're not a pervert. That sex is the most vanilla sex you can ever have. Yeah, there we go. There we go. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a round of applause for having anal sex with a beaver. You really didn't like the stuff about Latin in the first half, did you? Oh, yes, that's good. Yeah, very nice, very nice. I used to be a philosophy teacher. You teach about arguments for the existence of God. One of them is that when you look at nature, you look at the beauty of nature, you look at the complexity of nature. And one argument goes, well, how can this sort of thing just emerge? How can the eye emerge? How can a wing emerge? This man's nodding here. Like, it can't just happen. It needs a God's guiding hand to help. I used to think that argument was utter rubbish until I found out that the anal glands of the Eurasian beaver are vanilla flavours. Right? That has got to be evidence for some sort of deity, right? Possibly Satan, but like, I mean, that shit can't happen by accident, right? There's a perverted Satan, and he lives in our lives. And it's you. It's you! Isn't it? You, mate.
Alex is here, and you guys have gigged together for quite a few years now. Like, you
5
guys
years.
have been up in Edinburgh and stuff together.
Yeah.
What was the first memory you guys have of kind of gigging together or chatting through material together?
Do you want to? Do you remember the first time?
Was just thinking about it a bit earlier today. I bet Connor would ask where we first met. I think, Jacob, it was at that Pay What You Want cafe in Banbury. Do you know that little anti-capitalist thing? that we were
I
at,
know
where
exactly
you
what
could
you
get some
mean.
food.
Ahir Shah was there. There was an honesty box at the back. That was the first time
Yeah.
we like properly hung out, but that wasn't actually the first time we gigged together. The first time we gigged together, I've just remembered, and I've got quite a strange good memory for these things. It was with Simon Kane at the
Oh wow.
Phoenix Members Club.
Hmm.
Do you
Oh, was it
remember?
there? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I do
Yeah,
remember that. There was
you
only like 3 of us
you
on
were
or something, and it was
me, you, and Matt Smith. Do you remember Matt Smith, big lad with a beard?
yeah. Just got a bit about chips.
Yeah, you were doing Shakespeare material as well. You were wearing a tweed waistcoat and jacket.
Yeah, I
That's
was
so
doing
Alex.
a character. Yeah.
Mate, I tell you what, I look back at what I was doing at those gigs back then. I wish I was doing a character too. I wish I could pretend it was a character. But yeah, since I actually remember, I remember that gig you referenced. It was a fucking tiny gig in a cafe in Banbury.
I mean, it was an
And
absolutely
didn't
killer
you?
lineup for what it was. I mean, what was it? Sort of like 6 people in the audience or something like that. And I remember Ahi was there. Were you and Jake Farrell there as well? I think maybe that's where I
I
met
drove
Jake as
up
well.
with I drove up with Ben Lund Conlon
Of
and
course, yeah,
Rosie
yeah, yeah,
Holt.
yeah.
Who are
Yeah,
both great.
lovely,
God,
lovely,
that's a
lovely.
ridiculous lineup.
Yeah, and our hair was amazing, and I remember watching our hair that night, and our hair's like a mate of mine now, so I wouldn't want to say it to his face, but he genuinely changed the way that I thought of how to do comedy that night. The way he performed to a cafe of 6 people,
Yeah,
like.
yeah,
I remember speaking to you about it in the car on the way home, Alex, and the way Ahir performed and
yeah.
stuff. And actually, I remember the way you and I bonded over that performance. I was like, oh, Alex is fucking cool. Alex gets it. Do you know what I mean? And since then, we've obviously gigged together and written together a lot. But I think that was the first
Yeah,
time.
yeah. I think Ahi was staying with me for a few days. I think.
Yeah, he was.
And so I'd had such an intense hit of like watching him perform in like from everything from like a big room to that small space, and watching how he was still like both himself, and how the both the jokes and the commentary on society were like the same. It wasn't like he would do a joke and then make an interesting point. It was just like the joke and the
Yeah.
interesting point were the same thing, and it's something I've been chasing for years afterwards. I think he's a master of it.
It's so difficult, and it's such a kind of, and it's something actually I remember. Yeah, I mean he is absolutely brilliant at that, and I'm trying to remember which show of his it was. I think this was 2017 actually, so it wasn't that long ago. I think it was 2017, and the show he would have been preparing would have been Control, which was a kind of
Yeah,
response to Brexit, wasn't it?
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
No, I think you're 100% right. I think the point you make about the way I hear as you say, makes interesting points that are funny rather than making an interesting point and then making a joke it's so difficult. And so I read all of my reviews, and I remember I got a 3-star review for my first show in 2018, which said exactly that, which was like, the problem with this show is he says something interesting and then makes a joke about a much less interesting topic. And it's so, especially, for clarity, Ahir was actually directing the show that I was preparing this year before everything happened, before we locked down and Edinburgh was cancelled. And I do think that I try and do, I guess, a similar thing to Ahir. We have very different angles and perspectives, and I think that it makes our comedy quite different. But in terms of like, that's very very passionate social commentary with elements of philosophy and politics in it. That's kind of what I'm attempting. And you're right, Alex. I think he's so good at it for that reason, that the most interesting bits are hilarious.
yeah,
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, like in your defense, Jacob, don't put yourself like you're also very, very good at that. I somewhat disagree with that 3-star review. Like there's always a bit of truth in these things or whatever, but like I think that's definitely a real skill that you have. When I think probably told you I do this. I very occasionally will use jokes of yours when I'm trying to coach or direct students. I use them as examples of all sorts of different things that are both a really funny classic joke structure, but also either like a form of like formal logic and stuff like that. I know you find this deeply pretentious,
I didn't
but I
know
do
that at
use your
all.
stuff for that.
I didn't know that at all.
Ah, no, I do, yeah.
And I find that fascinating because
Yeah, well, I direct people and stuff.
yeah.
I mean, so often when I get a student who'll say that they hate wordplay or whatever, and they're like, I'm never going to have any wordplay in my sets or whatever, and I'll go, oh, like why? And they're like, oh, like it's cheap and it's empty. I want to, say real things. I'll often give your joke or an example of it. I really hope you don't mind, about lad culture. Do you know the one that I mean? I think it's a really wordful union of
Oxymoronic as a phrase.
of wordplay and point together, and it really demonstrates there's the wordplay doesn't come at the expense of the point. It is the point, and it's a really excellent example for people to hear when they think that wordplay is in some way sort of cheap or hacky. I mean, I won't force you to do it on the podcast. Or whatever. No one wants
I
to
don't
do the
mind doing that. So
material.
the joke is I don't like lad culture. I find lad culture moronic, and even if you disagree that lad culture is moronic as a culture, you could agree it's oxymoronic as a phrase. And it is one that I'm quite proud of. It's like one of the few like self-contained gags that I've ever done. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I would correct you there. I think you've also got other like self-contained gags in there or whatever. But yeah, I think lots of your material falls into that structure. And actually, this is kind of like my pet project, right? That like I think that loads of stand-up is fascinating when it uses like traditional like argument formula. When we talk about like premises and stuff like that, like I see all stand up that I really like as being in that structure, that sort of argumentative structure, and your stuff does that like a lot, where the argument is the joke, whereas there's nothing wrong with doing this, but you can have arguments or points and facts, and then stick a joke in alongside or as a tangent. But I find it fascinating. And so yeah, like you also do this as well. You sort of, when you're talking about your material, and this is why when I put you on something like stand-up history or stand-up philosophy, I think it really shows through. You always put your own material like down. I think it's a really fascinating bit of like psychology about you. Whenever you do those shows, the idea is that it's like 4 or 5 stand-up comics talking about something from the past, basically stand-up history or whatever. You'll often come up on stage and you go, right, I'm not an expert. And I don't know why you choose to do that, because in lots of other ways, you are a real authority. On your podcast, you're a real authority. In your stand-up, when you're making socio-political points, you come across as an authority. I've got my own sort of psychological theories about why you do it. But do you agree that you do it, and why do you think you do it?
Can I hear your psychological theories first as to why it is?
It's a big question, isn't it? It's a big accusation.
I love all this, by the way, and I should say this is a lot of when Alex and I hang out. This is the kind of nerdy, and it's I'd hasten to point out it's not just about me. We don't just sit and talk about me. These are the conversations I really enjoy having with Alex. But yeah, I'm keen to hear your theory on why that might be.
So I think it comes in 2 parts. The first part is just that you're a nice, polite, modest, kind human being, and such that it's sometimes rude to present ourselves as like authorities and things, as knowing about things. And I think that's just something that is going on. But you take that to another level, and I think that's because of the association with certain forms of education with class. I think it's deeply like class ridden. When you were talking earlier about not sounding like the sort of person who would listen to Radio 4 or have an award for that sort of thing, I think as soon as you're asked to talk about history, you would talk about the history of St. George on stage daily. But as soon as the context was given that the theme was history and stuff like that, you would suddenly go up and be like, right, I am not an expert. And it's to do with a really disappointing association with class and education that's really, 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 really hard to shake off. Like you both know I'm a school teacher or whatever, and for some people it's really ingrained in them. Oh, this is science, this is history, this is maths. It's not for me, and I spend my life fighting to get that out of people, and it stays with them. it stays with them so long. You're an exceptionally clever and well-informed person, Jacob, who makes a living from telling people about things they don't know about, yet you still will come on stage when the association is with a quote-unquote academic topic and come up and say, I'm not an expert, or apologize in some way for presenting your knowledge of the past or philosophy or whatever it is. And I think it's fascinating and part of a... Anyway, that's my claim. You could just go, nah, mate. Nah, Farron, got it all wrong there.
You know, I've
I mean, which might be perfectly valid.
I've got to say a massive thanks for all the compliments that were present in that. To begin with, I agree with the associations between education and class. What I think is the case, and I don't say this as a criticism of anyone involved, but when you do a night called stand-up philosophy, for example, or stand-up history, it's impossible not to be aware that you are the least educated person in the room, and I would also say that it's, you know, when I do other gigs, when I perform at the Glee, for example, when I perform at the at clubby comedy clubs, which are populated much more so with, and if we're going to talk about education in class, we have to sort of make the slightly broad assumption that, you know, lower class people have had less expensive education, upper class people have been to better schools and better universities, right? And I know that's not always the case, but just for the sake of this, let's just assume that sometimes might be the case. So when I perform in comedy clubs that are much more sort of working class environments, I almost play up to the point of being of being slightly clever clogsy on stage, right? So for example, this kind of works. So the gag that you mentioned before, the wordplay oxymoronic as a phrase, you know, moronic lad culture thing.
Mm-hmm.
When I do that in a comedy club such as the Glee Club or the Comedy Store or one of those, I almost have to give a knowing look to the audience of going, I know I'm being a pretentious, know-it-all, clever clogs prick while saying this. And often, you know, the initial response to that gag will be silence of everyone going, what did you just try and say? And me giving them that look to go, I know I'm being a bit of a prick now, is what gets the laugh and releases the tension and allows me to continue without hiccup, right? Whereas in a room like stand-up philosophy, you get a smattering of applause and go, oh, very good, you know. So I know what you mean, Alex, and I understand, especially as someone who with the, I mean, you know, I think one of the most fascinating things about you is that you're not as posh as you sound.
Don't tell everybody.
But having met your family and sort of, you know, knowing your background and stuff, but as someone who did very well at school, went to a very good university, and now you teach in areas that are more sort of, you know, working class as a broad term to describe them. It must be frustrating seeing people actively disassociate themselves with the idea of intellect and education because of their background. But what I would say is that when you do that as a person from a more working class background than the people around you, such as me when I'm performing at a stand-up history, stand-up philosophy gig, I'm aware of the positive results of me saying that to that audience. I'm aware that they will then think, oh, he's a bit down to earth. Oh, he's a Jack the Lad trying hard. Oh, anything that he says has been information that he's garnered himself through hard work, and thus you get an audience to warm to you. And I'm not apologetic about that, because it's literally my job to make a room full of people like me, you know. So I don't mind using not necessarily underhand tactics to make that happen, but being aware of what being slightly humble about my own knowledge does, if that answers the question.
So I mean, I definitely know that you'll have made stylistic decisions about like how high your status is and stuff like that. You're very aware of that sort of thing, very skilled at those sort of comedic tools. But I think, I don't know how consciously you did it here, but I'll pick you up on it again. When you said in a room like stand-up history or stand-up philosophy, you laugh and say, these are your words, I'm obviously not a clever person in that room. Like, yes, you are. Yeah,
Not as educated, I think was the term I used.
not as educated. You were. I still think that's an example of your own. Like, you have a master's, Jacob. You will be, I promise you,
I
in
don't have
that
a
room.
master's.
I think you've got masters in
I don't have a
drama.
master's.
Do you not?
No, I haven't. I've got a bachelor's degree in theatre arts.
Oh, you used to have a tag, did you not, when you had a jumper up your jumper when you were being a
Yes,
camel?
that
And
that was a
I've
lie.
been
That was a
I've been
lie.
misled by the. It was a very good joke, very believable as well. Either
Yes.
way, there will definitely be people
Yes.
in that room who don't have bachelors even and all that sort of stuff. And so anyway, I think there's still some truth in. Well, I don't know what we're arguing about. I think we both agree. But I think it's
No, we're not.
fascinating.
No, we're not arguing.
I feel the exact same way as you do when you're in those gigs. I did one stand-up philosophy for Alex, and I felt so out of my depth. But I think what's really interesting is that there's clearly a shared interest in those areas of politics, philosophy, and history. So, when it comes to Jericho, and when it comes to a Jericho audience specifically, Jacob, is it more of like, does it feel like a different gig to you, and what aspects of it are a challenge and what aspects of it are a pleasure that you maybe don't have in like your kind of glees and your commedia or whatever else? What's the sort of differences from your approach as a performer to a Jericho audience?
I absolutely adore doing Jericho gigs because I think you get a thoughtful audience. I think you get a very patient audience, and I think often you find the audiences at things like that are an extension of the person who runs them. You know, I think it's fascinating
Hmm.
the way that works. That you always find it. It's these comedy clubs where they're kind of run and and curated, I suppose, by a comedian. You find you find that they sort of bear the hallmarks of their creators. So, for example, the Angel Comedy Club, or as it's the Bill Murray now in London, it was kind of created by, amongst others, Barry Ferns. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's everything you like about Barry Ferns. It's very warm, it's very friendly, it's everyone's very nice to each other. Do you know what I mean? So in the same way, there's the same positive aspects of Alex within Jericho. It's a thoughtful, patient, well informed audience. I've found there have been times where they're sort of less squeamish, or it's potentially slightly more squeamish about certain things. But you also
Hmm.
can't make any like broad assumptions about them. Like I've had audience members at Jericho gigs. I was about to say admit. I think that's the right verb though. Admit to voting Brexit.
Yeah.
That so it's not quite as it's not quite as simple as saying, oh, they're all a load of lovies with degrees from Oxford who like to sit and think during comedy shows, but they're certainly they're very thoughtful audiences, and it's beautiful for when you're putting together a show, when you're putting together like a longer show. I mean, I think I did a tour show. I mean, it's a grandiose way of saying that I came and performed in a cafe just before lockdown. I did my previous Edinburgh show Falaraki, and like a preview of my new show Bump.
Yeah, it was a
Um,
fantastic night.
well, thanks, man. But yeah, that was like, it's just lovely, really nice people in a nice setting, patient, up for me just messing around and trying out new ideas, and like that allow you as a sort of a writer and performer to go as deep down a kind of rabbit hole of an idea as you want,
Yeah,
without
yeah.
having to think too cohesively about where it is you're going. Do you know I think that's so much of stand up hinges on whether an audience feels anxious because they don't trust you. And the
Yeah.
beautiful thing about these gigs is
Absolutely.
the way that Alex has trained them as an audience. They trust you to follow through on a thought process, or on a
Yeah.
tangent, or on a story that you perhaps haven't turned into formulated stand up with punchlines just yet. And because that trust is there, you then feel like you've got more of a license to make a leap of faith as a performer, and thus you're actually more likely to land upon a punchline, or something structurally cohesive that makes it feel satisfying for an audience. So it kind of works both ways. The more an audience trusts you as a performer, you feel like you can make those jumps and those leaps of faith and try things that end up giving the audience that satisfaction, because it's either a punchline or as I say, a kind of a structural ending to a routine. So
Yeah.
you're essentially you're writing on stage with the audience as your co-writer, and
Oh, that's
as I
nice.
say, it's an extension of the curator of the gig and the Alex himself, who is such a good writer and listener.
Yeah. I think what you said before about it kind of being an extension of sort of Alex's personality, and then also, Alex, what you said about spending your life both in teaching and in comedy trying to make everyone realize that these sometimes, what could be perceived as highfalutin ideas of philosophy and politics and history, that they're accessible for everyone if you just talk about it in the right way. I think you've both kind of described Jericho perfectly there, and why Jericho audiences love coming to the cafe and they get really thoughtful material from really kind of talented writers and performers. Alex, is that everything you want to hear about Jericho?
Uh, It was. I agree with a huge amount of it, and yeah, I think Jacob, your sort of pet theory that comedy audiences begin to reflect certain things about who's running the gig is true. Um, I don't think that the Jericho audience necessarily looks and sounds like me. I know they're not the same like age demographic and stuff like that. So I'd like to clarify that I don't think that's what you necessarily meant. But like that bit about you go to a Jericho comedy because you want to see something interesting. I think that's really like, and that's where you get maybe a little bit of extra time from an audience who like
Hmm.
trust the performer, like, oh, this is going somewhere. And I think that's really, really important. And the other thing that I'd really like to put in as well is just that, and I'm always fighting this uphill battle. The reason that I'm blending like stand up and philosophy or history or science or whatever it is to get people to listen to it. Like people love stand up comedy, it's funny. And it's a way of making ideas accessible to people who wouldn't normally like think of themselves as being into it. The idea is not to speak to people with PhDs. The idea is to speak to anybody who finds an idea interesting. And so, although those nights will sometimes explicitly describe themselves by having like philosophy or history in the name, I think stand up is an excellent way of sneaking like amazing ideas and interesting ideas into the heads of audiences who might be like, oh, yeah, I didn't know like democracy worked in that way, or I didn't know that about
Hmm.
horseshoe crabs, or whatever the hell like it is. And I think
Yeah.
it's those nights aren't for, this is very serious, isn't it? Those nights aren't for people who already know stuff. Those nights are for people who want to know something new. And so
In a very fun way as well.
yeah, in a way that I'm not being very fun now. I've got all kind of serious about education suddenly, but I feel sort of riled up about it.
I think the
But yeah,
piece of
no, I
advice
think
you gave me, Alex, before I performed at Stand Up Philosophy, when I was writing a whole new set, it was for a St. George's Day show, and it was on nationalism and patriotism. And I
yeah,
was a little bit worried about talking about some of the things like to do with the troubles and the IRA and stuff in a kind of funny way. And you told me that audiences at those shows would be probably more willing, perhaps more willing than they would on a typical Saturday night, to listen, so long as you never drop below interesting. So be funny where possible, but
yeah.
so long as you're interesting, those nights will work.
That's so true.
You now do that material, Connor, about the IRA and the troubles as like go-to material in
Yeah.
general comedy gigs. Like I've never known anybody to do a stand-up philosophy night, a stand-up history night, like a Jericho preview where they're playing with an interesting idea. I've never known somebody to then not take that material and do it in somewhere like your weekend comedy club,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
it's you've trained it, you've sort of worked out the beats of it to an audience who's, the reason why it works so much better in those kind of themed nights isn't because it's easier or it's less funny. It's funnier because you've done like a magic trick, like for that silly bacteria night, for example, we did relatively recently. It's such a magic trick to have six performers all do a different take on like bacteria. It's like, what, I can't believe somebody's doing more. It's funnier because it's all on the theme. It's almost like in an improv game where it's like, right, tell me 10 things about soap. you can't normally do it. It's like a magic trick. You sort of it's funny because it's all condensed in together in a way that I don't think is like easier. I think it's harder. I think it's better. I think it's ultimately by the end funnier as well.
Jacob, I mean, this is so interesting, and like you were saying before, this kind of conversation about the mechanics and structure and ideas and philosophy behind stand up. I think the three of us could sit here all day on it, but I do want to come back to the show that you were putting together for this year before the Fringe was cancelled. You said Ahir was directing it for you. I felt very lucky to see it at Common Ground for Jericho just before lockdown. What's the kind of status of that show? Where's your thought with it now? I mean, is it going to change much? I assume you're going to do it next year, but how have current events altered your plans for it?
I mean, it's such a difficult thing to think about, and it's something that I've almost given up thinking about. To be honest, I mean, I definitely will do a show next year. Whether it will be called what it was initially going to be called, and whether it will be about the same things as it was initially about, I honestly don't know. I mean, I do tour support for John Kearns, which is like a massive privilege because he's like a hero of mine, and he's a good mate now. And we were talking about this sort of thing, and he still had like a few dates left of his tour, and I mean we initially, when this happened, rescheduled them. Well, he rescheduled them to July. I mean, it's July now.
Yeah.
I mean, we might have actually been due to be out tonight. But that's now going to be rescheduled for the spring, which means that a show that he probably began writing in autumn 2018, he will be performing in the spring of 2021.
It's mad.
And the interesting, it's mad, and a lot of people don't think it is mad because a lot of people just go, "Well, it's jokes." You still know the jokes. You can read the script back. You can perform them. But I think there is a trend in comedy at the moment of these kind of 52-minute, hour-long shows that are somewhat personal and somewhat introspective and thoughtful, and they allow you to kind of almost, as Alex was saying, put forward an argument or at least explore a topic. And whilst John isn't someone you'd think of as being typical of that, I think John's the master of that, and for me, he's the best. He's the best live stand-up performer in the UK at the moment. But so we've spoken about that, and like, how do you do that? So, and that's an exaggeration of what I have to do, in the sense that I was writing a show. I'd started writing it at the end of 2019. I'm now not going to probably perform it properly until 2021. Without wanting to go too much into the topics of the show, it was about having a conversation with myself about whether I think it's right to have children in a broken world. That being somewhat inspired by the fact that me and my girlfriend went through a period where we were expecting a child and then we weren't, and then the sort of twist at the end being, well, now we are expecting a child. I've kind of had to make decisions about what I put on social media, because I'm like, well, if I still want that to be a twist at the end,
yeah,
I can't,
yeah, don't spoil the ending by posting a photo.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
So I sort of a few weeks ago made a decision of going, well, I'm not gonna. I mean, my agent at the beginning of all this was like, "Are you still writing that show?" And I was like, "That would be fucking mental if I was still writing that show." I think that'd be the strangest impulse if I was still writing stand up in the way I was before. It'd be crazy. So, in all honesty, I don't know. I listened to Sean Walsh do a podcast where he spoke about the way he thinks of Edinburgh and the Fringe, and he sort of said, well, it's like a catch up. It's like you've seen someone for the first time in a year, and you go, right, what have you been up to? And the thing is, now it's going to be 2 years, and all of those things that I was going to talk about in that show, there's going to be even more things that happen to me between now and then, and it's about talking about what you want to talk about, weaving it into a narrative, and revealing what you want to reveal. And I suspect a lot of the things I wanted to talk about will still be what I want to talk about. But then the one bit of material that I have written in lockdown has been about the Black Lives Matter movement, and why it only tends to be white working class men who oppose that movement. When you see people surrounding statues and defending them, it's always white working class men. And I actually had an incident where I was on my way to a Black Lives Matter protest, and I'd accidentally dressed like a statue protector. And this was the first day. This was the first day that they were out. This is before anyone really knew what they were.
Yeah.
You know, and I sort of, on the way, someone had said to me, by the way, you know, there's these like fucking weird racist guys defending statues today. And I was literally wearing like a Stone Island hoodie. I had a football scarf around my neck. And my mate, who I was going to meet at the march and march to do the Black Lives Matter march together with, he called me being like, mate, my phone's about to die. I can't meet you at the station. Can we please meet at the Churchill statue? And I had to just cancel.
Oh, God.
Because I was like, I can't stand there wearing like dress like, do you know what I mean? Waiting for a mate, trying to say to all the other racists, I'm not one of you. I'm you know, I'm here. I'm on the other side. I've just got to wait here for my friend. So, but then I think that then lends into an interesting, hopefully interesting exploration of why that tends to be and why it's a certain group of people and why mates of mine who are literally, you know, that I grew up with, who are on the other side of that cause to me now. But you know, so I honestly don't know. I hope I still get to do something that resembles Bump, the show I was putting together. I'll definitely still be working with R here, and I'll definitely be doing a show next year.
Yeah.
But I don't know if I'll be able to do it on the same topics or along the same narrative structure as I'd planned. And you know, I spent a long time being sad about that in the spring, and then you know, I sort of got used to that idea, and you just have to kind of have faith in yourself that you'll be able to make something else.
Yeah. I mean, I now feel kind of especially lucky having seen it just before lockdown, because if it's not going to exist in the same way that you were thinking about it 4 months ago, uh, then yeah, I'm very glad that I got to experience it.
Oh, thanks, man.
Guys, we've had such a great chat, and I literally think we could probably keep this going all day, but we've got to go to a little message now in the podcast from our brilliant charity partner, Oxfordshire Mind. Have a listen to this.
The outbreak of coronavirus is affecting all of our lives in lots of different ways, and in these uncertain times, we are seeing a surge in demand for our services. Last month, we had a 390% increase in crisis calls to our information line and a 117% increase in calls to our benefits advice service, supporting people in financial need to claim the benefits they are entitled to. We are still here for you, your friends, colleagues and communities. Our services are still running, albeit in a different way, but we need your support to help us continue. Please make a donation to Oxfordshire Mind so we can continue to make sure anyone with a mental health problem has somewhere to turn for advice and support. You can donate via our website at oxfordshiremind.org.uk, and you can also find free and fun, exciting ways to fundraise for the team via virtual fundraising ideas.
All right, Jacob, now it's time for pressing questions, where we ask you some incredibly tough questions that other podcasts are simply too scared to ask. All we need from you are some truthful answers. Can you do that for us?
Absolutely. I'm doing my best.
Fantastic. All right, Jacob, what was the first film you ever saw at the cinema?
That's a good question. I think what was the first film I ever saw at cinema? I don't remember. One of the earliest ones I remember was the Pokemon movie.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Not the recent Pokemon movie, right? You've been to the cinema before 2019.
My mum took me when I was 27. It was great.
Were you a big Pokemon fan growing up?
Yeah, man. I loved Pokemon. I thought the movie, I remember thinking the movie was a letdown, though.
Oh.
I remember thinking the movie was a bit weird. And it like, I remember the movie not being... Yeah, I went to the cinema to see it. And I remember it was one of those where going with friends' mums was always rubbish. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I mean, very weird if your friends aren't there as well.
Yeah, my mates were there, but looking back now, it is shit when friends' parents are overly present. Do you know what I mean? Because like, and I was thinking about this the other day, yeah, because I'm about to have a kid. I was like, am I going to have to be mates with my kid's mates' parents?
Oh,
do you know what I mean?
yeah,
If my
yeah.
kid makes friends at school, do I have to make friends with their? Because there's no reason why I would like them. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's got to be something you're just gonna have to suck it up, mate.
Yeah,
That's gonna
possibly.
happen.
Possibly.
All right, Jacob, how much is too much to pay for a burger?
I really struggle with over £10 for burgers. Do you know what makes me fucking sick is when you pay £10 for a burger
Yeah.
and then you have to pay more for chips. That's nuts.
Oh, yeah. So
That's
for you, the
bollocks,
limit is
man.
£10 plus a side in that.
Including so, and also I don't eat meat, right? So it has to be one of these fancy vegan burger things. That is so doable under a tenner. That really is.
I've spoken to the brilliant Chelsea Birkby about this before, and
Right.
Chelsea has some strong opinions on standardizing the veggie burger, because some places you go in, you'll pay a tenner for a big mushroom. Some places it's like pulled jackfruit and that kind of thing. Have you got strong opinions on what that £10 should get you?
No, like a mushroom's cheeky, isn't it? But at the same time, I would prefer a mushroom to something like the bean burgers are dog shit. Corn, right? If you get the corn southern fried fillet, I challenge anyone to distinguish that from a chicken fillet. So they're fucking brilliant.
Oh wow!
And actually, little known fact, the KFC vegan burger is actually just corn, and they do admit it if you search for that information.
There's your next podcast, sort of me.
I mean, the way my income is at the moment, I'm going to have to keep making podcasts until I make that podcast. But there's a one I have to say the Alfie Brown is one of my favorite comedians. Has done a really good bit of material about how vegans who eat fake meat is quite nonsensical. I won't butcher the material by quoting it too much, but it's really good. But I really like fake beef burgers that are really convincing. My girlfriend's dad, we gave him one. We took him to like a nice pub in London and got him one of these like seitan, ultimate burger things.
Yeah.
And he's vegan, and he just refused to eat it because he just refused to believe it wasn't beef.
No way.
He's this lovely guy from the west of Ireland, and he's recently become vegan. He took a bite. He was like, I don't think that's vegetables. We're like, no, it is, Pat. That's we're all eating it. We don't eat meat. It's no, I don't think so.
Bonus points for the accent there, Jacob. That is
my girlfriend. If she listens to this, she'll tell me the accent's shit.
All right, Jacob. Which of the 7 deadly sins is your favorite? Do you need a little refresher?
Hang on, I've got Wikipedia up. Right.
Oh, brilliant.
What are we looking at? Lust. I like that. Gluttony. I like that. Greed. I think these are wrong. The fourth one on here is just sloth.
Yep, that's what I've got as well. Sloth.
What?
It's
Not
just dreadful. Just saying sitting around relaxing is a sin. Not just a sin, but a deadly sin. That can't be right.
I like a bit of that then. I do like a bit of sloth. Wrath. I definitely like wrath. Envy, I don't like, but I do a lot of. Pride, haven't got loads.
And Pride, listen to Jacob Hawley on BBC Sounds. So if you had to pick one, Jacob, which one is the one that you're going with?
I do like gluttony, I have to say. I do like a bit of gluttony.
Gluttony. I think that's the acceptable answer. Lust is just a little bit. Lust can sit at kind of 2 or 3 there.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm 28 now. I don't need all that, I'm having a kid. So I don't need lust.
You completed lust, mate. You've got a kid coming.
I didn't see much lust. I'll tell you what, if we had thought about that lust at the time, we might not be in this situation.
All right, Jacob, how do you think the world's going to end?
I mean, it has, hasn't it? Basically there. I think it's going to end very slowly and boringly, and I think that's what's happening.
Yeah. I think someone's activated it, haven't they? Alex, have you got any thoughts on how the world's going to end?
Are you asking me because that's the sort of thing I would know? It's like Alex's revelation.
Have you got any hot theories?
Do you know what? I think Jacob's entirely right that it will be boring and it will be slow. It'll be, what if it's a bat that's done us this time? It's going to be, you know what? It's going to be some other sort of like friendly woodland creature when it'll be like the badger or something, or the squirrel. They'll have the next thing that truly wipes us out. I think it's going to be one of those. I think it'll be a woodland creature, and we won't see it coming.
I'll say this: if you were to line up every woodland creature, right, and say which one do you reckon is going to win the world, I'd have picked bat pretty quickly.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But then no one suspects the bunny, and that's how they get you.
That's how they. Or, I mean, I was going to go into a whole thing there about Jessica Rabbit.
Oh, we're back to lust again.
We're back. Yeah. Well. This is it. Maybe that's how they'll get us sexy.
If we put together a little trailer for this episode, it's just going to be those words. All right, Jacob, my final question for you is, if the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were real, do you think they'd be celebrated or feared?
They'd be in jail.
Do you think?
Mate, honestly, I don't want that running around.
Do you not think they would be able to break out pretty quickly?
I think, well, no, but you'd have to do something. Like I've watched enough sci-fi. You can't have that, man. Okay, what I would say, yeah, if you look at Iran's potential ownership of nuclear or weapons of mass destruction, you cannot have. It very much depends where they pop up in terms of global economic politics. That's do you know what I mean? I think if America were to say, oh, maybe not.
So, just to follow your logic, you're saying that if the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles popped up in Iran, that's really bad. But if they were in New York, like eating pizza,
It sounds more racist when you say it like that. What I mean is, it has to be controlled by a stable government that can be trusted. And you'll hear when you listen back. I hesitated before saying America, and that's not that's not me indulging in Trump humor. I don't think the other superpowers at play would let that happen. I don't think China would like America having weapons in the form of turtles. I think, I mean, we're talking about the end of the world. If they turn up now, we've got problems.
I think that is a sage advice to the world. Just control your mutant turtles. Just be cautious. I think that's a solid ending for that section.
If they're out there, this is the thing. If you could fly, would you tell anyone?
Oh, you've turned the tables here. Alex Farrow, if you could fly, would you tell anyone?
Maybe.
If you're the only human being on Earth that can fly, do you not think that A, people will try and destroy you, and B, you will be given responsibilities you don't necessarily want?
Yeah. And then do you become a bit of a prick if you don't want to use your flying for good?
But why should you have to?
It would be unfair societal pressure to make someone...
I'm going to say that I think the superpower of flying is not that important because we have machines that do it. We think that it would be a great superpower. Actually, if you have lots of money, do you know what? You've got the superpower to fly wherever you want. Like, it's a helicopter. Like, it's not that hard to achieve if you're like a billionaire. It's like the Batman theory of being a superhero. With enough money, you just buy the tech that allows you to do that. We are months away from Elon Musk having Batman-like powers and definitely using them for evil.
And also, he's already got a villain name, Elon Musk. I mean, you know that guy has a lair in a volcano somewhere. Brilliant. Well, there we go. That was pressing questions. Jacob, before we let you go, first of all, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. Do you have anything you'd like to recommend to our lovely listeners? Any of your podcasts coming up? Anything exciting that you think people should check out?
I've got 2 podcasts, as we mentioned, on BBC Sounds, which I'd love for people to check out. I've got a new one coming in the autumn time. In the meantime, I'd really recommend a guy called Sean Mahoney, who's a friend of mine, who's kind of like a spoken word poet and writer, who's got a new show coming out soon. So check out Sean Mahoney on social media, and he's got some He's got a great back catalogue. He did a show that's on SoundCloud at the moment called Sad Lamps, which is really good. So yeah, check him out.
That's a brilliant recommendation. Thanks so much, mate. Well, Jacob, I can't wait until things are a little bit more normal and we can get our lovely Jericho audiences back in front of us and have you there on stage with us. It's always such a highlight when you're at Jericho. We really love having you. Thanks so much for joining us, mate. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Cheers, Alex. Cheers, Connor.
Cheers, buddy. Great to see you, man.
Cheers, mate. See you. Bye-bye. Well, there we go. That was the fantastic Jacob Hawley, and it was really lovely to be joined by Alex for that chat. Jacob recommended Sean Mahoney, and we'll add links to the episode description so you can check out his work. Also, make sure you check out Jacob's podcasts on BBC Sounds. As I said to Jacob in the episode, his drugs podcast is jaw-droppingly brilliant. You owe it to yourself to check that out. If you enjoyed the podcast, please like, subscribe, share, rate, all of that stuff. We love doing this, and we would really love to connect as many of our brilliant audience members as possible with our lovely acts. If you can, also support the great work that Oxfordshire Mind are doing by visiting our fundraising page. That's in the podcast description. We've raised over £70,000 for Oxfordshire Mind over the last few years, and it's helped support their vital work. Every penny you donate helps them do truly amazing stuff. Head to jerichocomedy.com for more information on all of our exciting shows that we're doing over the next few weeks. Normal gigs are getting closer and closer, so keep an eye on the website and on our social media. We'll be back with another episode next week, but if you can't get enough of my dulcet tones, check out episode 1 of another Jericho Comedy production, The Dinner Party. The link to that will be in the episode description. Until next time, thanks so much for listening, take care, and bye-bye.